First of all, thanks everybody for making the time for this. Um, our objective is to have, I think there's about 9 sessions that we've got planned to basically provide an overview of how to deploy and use OpenIAM. Um, but we'll be kind of targeting more of a workforce identity use case in this. And the so just a little bit of background. OpenIAM is one platform that can be targeted towards two use cases, right? There's workforce identity, then there's a customer identity. So our goal today is really going to be it's a first step in that whole workforce identity process. The idea is that we want to introduce people to OpenIAM, and as part of that, um, go ahead. If you have questions, just go ahead and post them on chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay. So yeah, so basically the point is that we want to provide a fairly decent overview of how to use OpenIAM. And so I think there's a question. Alexi, go ahead. If you just want to post the question, that'd be great. So, oh, okay, thanks. I just saw your hand up, which is why I asked. All right. So our goal is that we want to be able to provide a overview of how to use OpenIAM, and the idea is that we should be able to go through the normal use cases, right? So be able to deploy OpenIAM, to be able to configure it, to set up joiner, mover, leavers processes, to have workflows where we can do request approval, perform access certifications, and then also to be able to configure MFA and SSO. Uh, there's a very diverse audience that we have here. There's some people who are already OpenIAM customers. Some of them are partners who we've been working with for many years. And there are others who are fairly new to OpenIAM or to IAM in general. So we're going to start from the very basics. And so the first slide here in this session is going to be um, about the foundations behind why people are actually deploying these types of IAM products, right? And so the topics I'm covering here, they're from what we see at our customers, but this is also pretty standard in terms of the main drivers behind workforce identity products, right? So here I've kind of narrowed it down to about 4 main points, but honestly there are quite a few other drivers as well. The biggest pain point that we see with our customers is the cost of achieving compliance. So a lot of companies, say like in financial services or public sector, which which are very compliance oriented, they need to do regular SOC reviews and they have other certification requirements. They're spending an incredible amount of time in being able to achieve these certifications. So and I think some of the data out there, we see like on average, companies like mid to large enterprises spending about $10.7 million a year, which is, a pretty obscene amount of money. It's higher in some other industries, depending on which ones you look at. Related to this is also the high risk of security breaches. There are more security breaches today than there ever have been. Identity is a critical part of that process, so to be able to mitigate risk related to identity goes a long way. And so one of the biggest problems we see is that companies, whether they're using IAM products or not, they're able to onboard people, right? It might take them a little bit longer, but they're able to onboard them. Maybe the access rights are not done in a really consistent way, but they're able to achieve that part. But where they really fall down is when people leave. So to be able to terminate accounts on time, and not being able to terminate this on time, creates basically a security hole, and it can be a temporary hole, or it could be a long drawn out, account, which is a orphaned account, which is just sitting there, and nobody knows about it. The other big driver behind these are, the lost productivity. So, like I said, we have some organization where it takes weeks for someone, new to be joining to get all the access that they need. So maybe the initial accounts are created, but the full range of access they need, takes a fair amount of time between the various departments that need to be involved. So part of our goal, with these solutions is also to be able to improve the end user productivity and also just to generally improve the user experience as well. It's a pretty negative experience when every small thing from like a password reset or requesting access takes days or weeks to happen, right? The last one is about machine identities, and this was a little bit newer. I mean, going back 8, 9 years ago, we probably didn't see this as a big driver for IAM products, but today we're seeing more and more companies which are, rapidly creating VMs, taking them away. These are part of the DevOps process, and so um, these VMs that are being created, they have identity within them as well, and not being able to manage them also poses a security risk. So this slide we kind of introduced in here because there's been a change of terminology. If we look at back when we started OpenIAM in 2008, we, used terms like identity governance and we used access management or privilege. I mean, those terms are still fairly common, but about a few years ago, we started seeing customer identity and workforce identity. And the way that we look at workforce identity is this is about tools and processes to manage, all your identities which are internal to the enterprise, right? These are your employees, your contractors, your vendors. This also includes like your privileged accounts, your service accounts. All things again which are internal, right? And the tools to kind of cover those, they vary. You've got various types of authentication and MFA policies. There is the user lifecycle management, where we onboard, offboard, we have transfers. There's a self-service capability where we can maybe delegate and empower people to do a little bit more of the work, right? And similar to that is also the single sign-on experience. We're kind of, start improving the user experience that people have, and also the periodic reviews where, be able to kind of simplify the effort to review things on a regular basis. So when we look at OpenIAM, this slide kind of describes a little bit more about what the components of OpenIAM look like. Um, and like I said, this is, it's one platform where we're targeting different use cases. And so in the corner of this diagram is this layer that we call shared services. So these are, your infrastructure components, things like a vault, a graph database, a message bus, which all services communicate with each other. There's also a search engine and a distributed cache, but so all of these things which are common to the whole platform are in this layer. So whether you're using identity governance aspect of it, or the access management part, or using, the PAM component, this shared services layer is always going to be there. The other services you can turn on and off, but this common layer is always going to be there, and everything kind of builds on top of it. And that's been part of our design from day one, to have this kind of common foundation to build on, right? The benefit of having this model is that it's significantly easier to manage and deploy. We want people to be able to get up and running in a short amount of time, and and then to be able to start to configure these, right? So basically the big drivers here, we want to be able to have the tools to manage internal identity, and kind of simplify the common tasks that we have, right? So shifting gears a little bit, kind of start talking a little bit more about how we can, deploy OpenIAM. So there are 3 different ways that we can deploy OpenIAM. So there's a RPM-based model. So this is an RPM file which you can download, and which is what we're going to be using for these training sessions, and you can deploy them on a Linux, platform. There is also a Docker Swarm version, and these are a collection of containers which you can download from our Docker Hub account. And it's very easy to use. It's, you basically pull the containers, you do a little bit of configuration, and you start it up. This version is great for doing POCs, doing any local testing or development. We don't recommend it at all for a production environment, just because within Docker Swarm, some of the components that we use, like Elasticsearch and Redis, we've not been able to basically get them to work well in a high availability environment. So we make this available more as like something that you can play with locally, but we don't really recommend, unless it's like a really small, deployment of 1,500 people and you don't care about HA. Then we have the Kubernetes world. Here we support a few different options. So we have Rancher, which is a popular, open source Kubernetes, environment that you can use. There's also, you can deploy in a cloud native environment for Azure and in AWS. We also support Google Cloud, but we don't see a lot of customers using Google in this way. There's also OpenShift from Red Hat, and there is Tanzu from VMware, which we've started seeing recently. There's a question whether if the recording would be available to all participants afterwards. Yes, it will be. So once we're done with this, we'll send out a link to the recordings. We're also going to publish them up onto YouTube so that the whole collection will be in one place, right? So kind of building on the whole, RPM-based deployment, right? So the next couple of slides talk about deployment architecture. So in this case, we have, look, I mean, if you wanted to, you can push everything down into one VM if you want, right? So all your OpenApp components can be running on one Linux VM with the database server and everything running there. In this diagram, what we've done is we've kind of, put all the OpenApp services in one layer, and then we took the database, made that a separate layer. And then there's this other component called Windows Server. This is a Windows VM, which is used to run all your connectors for the Microsoft world. So all of our connectors for, say, AD, Azure, Exchange, whatever have you, SQL Server, Windows servers, right? All of them are basically written in .NET and PowerShell. And we did that so that you have the most amount of flexibility of how we can integrate within the Windows world. So the downside to that is we need a separate VM which hosts these Windows-based connectors. This next slide kind of takes the same diagram and it pushes into an HA environment. So what we did here was, only thing that's really different is that this middle layer is now split up across 3 nodes, right? And also if you want to have high ability on the connector side, we can separate out the connectors as well. I mean, all the other non-Microsoft connectors, they're all like written in Java or GrubyScript, and they can run on the main Linux servers. But if you want to separate them out, you absolutely can. And the last slide about architecture is, say you have a really large deployment, and large in this case, I'm saying, roughly, when you start crossing over 25,000, employees or users, you have quite a few managed systems. It makes sense at that point to start to think about how we, scale this out, right? And so one of the things that we've done at other customers is that we take the infrastructure components, this is your Vault, your Elasticsearch, your Redis, and move it off into a separate cluster by itself. And then we have, say 3+ nodes for the main application. And this way, if you needed to scale further, you can add another node on the OpenIAM side and leave this, infrastructure stack alone, right? Okay. That being said, let's start to, work on the actual deployment. So a couple of things in the VM side is we're going to be using Red Hat Linux, we're using CentOS 8 Stream. The RPM deployment also supports Red Hat Linux 8.7 and 8.8. We recommend at least 48 gigs of RAM for a non-prod environment, 8 CPUs, and about 80 gigs of RAM. We have this in our documentation, and it's surprising though how many people will try to run this on 1 gig of RAM with 1 CPU, and the install will fail. It just the various components in there have been configured with a minimum amount of memory sizing that without the proper room, they just won't start up, right? And so that's part of what's here. Also, CentOS 8 Stream is kind of hit end of life. So in the next release, which we will be doing in about a week or two, there will be support for Rocky Linux. We see quite a few people asking for it. And in that version, we'll be supporting Rocky Linux 9 as well as Red Hat Linux 9 as well. Okay. So that being said, let's go to the install. I've already SSH'd into a VM which I set up for this. And everything that I'm going to be doing is going to be straight from our documentation. So there's going to be nothing that I'm really doing which is not available for everybody else. So first thing is I want to confirm that I have enough memory, right? So, and here it's saying I've got 64 gigs, of RAM. I'm going to check the CPU. I've got, more than 8. And I'm also going to check my OS, right? And if there's somebody else who's creating the VM for you, it's worth doing this because, again, these are common things that come up which prevent us from being able to have a successful deployment, right? So once we have these things in place, a couple of things that we need to install on CentOS, at least with the distribution that we're using with this cloud provider, we need to install char. So I'm just going to put that on there. And then there are a couple of options. So we can do a either a install which is based on having internet access or one without, right? So in this case, since I do have internet access, I'm going to follow those instructions. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download the RPM file. So there's a curl command which will, bring that down. And then next thing is I'm going to go ahead and install the RPM file. So I'm already logged in as root, so just keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, there's a question here of whether online documentation on how to set up an HA system. Yes, there is. It wasn't there for a while, but it was added a few months ago, and there are steps, and there are tools in the RPM file that will help you set up or kind of simplify the process of building out the HA cluster. Right. So once we have these things, the file downloaded and also the initialized, we're going to use the OpenIAM CLI. This is a command line utility that was introduced that it will come in pretty handy to be able to not just do the install, it will help with upgrades, it'll help with starting and stopping, checking log files, all of these things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. You'll be able to do that CLI. Oh, okay. Sorry. So one of the things that happens as part of the install is that it will reboot the VM. And the reason it's going to do that is that we need to assign it the change like the certain limits which are used for Elasticsearch, which need to be supported. So let's SSH back in. Probably need to wait a little bit longer. Okay. All right, now let's so it's going to ask you if you have internet access or not, and I'm going to say yes here, but there's some of our customers that are running in air-gapped environments, and they're going to say no. There are some other steps before you can run this and that because you probably need to download certain dependencies ahead of time, and then it will work. Because right now it's going to go out and basically download those files, from the OpenIAM website. The question was, I believe it's the same binary for both EIM and CIM. If I can confirm, yes, it is. That's exactly it. It's the same set of it's the same product, right? So that's why I said in the beginning that we are basically just targeting two different use cases with the same code base. Yeah. This part and the actual startup takes probably the longest amount of time. So these jar files which are being downloaded, these are all, key parts of the OpenIAM. These are the OpenIAM services which are being brought down. Okay, so here it's going to ask me if I want to use MariaDB locally or not. So there are four different databases that we support. So there's MariaDB or MySQL, there's Oracle, SQL Server, and Postgres. The MariaDB is kind of like a default, product that or a database that we can install just for like POC purposes. I think on the Docker version, you can choose between MariaDB and Postgres. But if you have your own existing database, then you don't want to say that you want to install this, right? Because you're going to be basically configuring it later to point to that. In this case, I'm going to go say yes because we have no other database there. Okay, and so these are basically initialization steps, right? That there's even if you were to install MariaDB, on your own, when you have it up and running, it's going to ask you to kind of set the main, the root password, right? So in this case, since we don't have one, I'm going to just say enter for none. I'm going to say yes, I want to set the root password. I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And I want to remove the anonymous users and remove the root login. Yes, I'm going to remove that as well. And so these things that I just threw up, those were the limits that were set earlier. Okay. At this point, it's going to go ahead and start to create a default certificate, which the Vault is going to use. So etcd is the storage which is being used by the Vault. The Vault is actually HashiCorp's Vault. It's the open source version that they offer. So the question was, is it possible to install Postgres locally? Yes, you can install Postgres locally. It won't be done by the RPM installer because it's only doing the MariaDB part. So you can install Postgres yourself. and then basically point OpenIAM to your Postgres installation, right? And we have documentation that we and I can share with you to show you how to do that. Right? So in this case, so inside the install, inside MariaDB, there's going to be two schemas that are going to be created. There's an OpenIAM schema, which is where a bulk of, all the OpenIAM users and all the policies are being kept. Um, and then there's a second database, which is called the activity database, and that's used for all the workflow stuff. So this step is about asking for the username for this part. So in this case, I'm just going to use the defaults. Um, and yeah, I'm just going to stick with, obviously I can change these, but for like production, you should change some of these, right? Like you should set your own passwords, and same thing with the ones for Rabbit and Redis. And so it's going to give you a chance to review it, and everything looks okay. I'm going to say, yes, and it's going to go. There's a question, is there access to some lab environment? Unfortunately, there's not a lab environment that we have, just because the number of people who are signed up for this, it'd be a little bit difficult for us to share a separate lab environment for each person. I would say the best thing is to kind of spin up a AVM, which has the appropriate number of resources, and use either the Docker or the RPM install, for that. Okay. So Cassandra is the storage database for Janus Graph. Janus Graph is the graph database that's being used in the product. Here you're going to see a kind of an ugly message that's going to come up. You can ignore that message. It's largely basically, the rest of the install is waiting for Cassandra to start, and Cassandra takes a little while for it to come up. And here's that ugly message, and it says waiting for Cassandra, right? So we should probably suppress this message, but don't be alarmed if you see this, as long as it continues. Okay, Cassandra's up, and it's moving on to the next part, right? So just, for reference, Elasticsearch, we use it in a few different ways. So one of it is it's where the audit logs are being stored. The second is it's got indexes to help us, with faster searching for users and groups and roles and other resources which are there. So it's got a pretty central role, within the OpenM architecture. And all the services communicate, with each other through RabbitMQ. So that's the message bus. And these vhosts are needed, by RabbitMQ. Okay, so sorry, there are a bunch of other questions coming up. Could I use RWS, AWS RDS as the database option? You certainly can. So again, as long as it's one of the four that we support, you can use AWS. And in fact, when we deploy on, say, AWS or Azure, for our clients, we're always using the platform databases that come with it. Can I talk about the community versus the enterprise version? So in essence, right now, the the community version is always a couple of point releases behind the enterprise version. And going forward, that's going to be changing a little bit. So we're going to be um, the community version and the enterprise will, this is after we release 4.2.2 in May, that they'll become the same, but community version will have a slightly limited feature set, and enterprise will have a larger feature set. So it's still, I mean, the same concept as today, where you have more capability in the enterprise version. But that being said, you're free to use the community version, for your own purposes. There is also a community portal at community.openam.com, which you can use to kind of post questions, and we're still trying to build out more adoption there. So by all means, you can use that as well. So here in this next step, it's going to ask me, about the version that I'm trying to upgrade from. So inside OpenIAM, there's a framework called Flyway. Flyway is a database schema versioning tool. And it basically takes all of, actually, let me just get it going. We're going to use the defaults like we do for everything else. Um, and I'll talk about that in a second. Um, So this is actually the question about Azure. So this is asking if you're going to be using an external database. Again, could be your own in your own environment, or it could be, a RDS type of a service, right? Um, no, I'm not going to be using an external database. I'm going to say no. Um, Okay, this should start in a second. My point earlier was about Flyway, was that we have basically the SQL scripts are broken out, basically all it's all the changes that have occurred over the last several years. And basically what Flyway is doing is that it's taking all of them and basically applying them um, as we go forward. And here it goes. Um, if you were doing an upgrade, you could tell it the version that you're on. And what Flyway will do is it will take all the scripts that came after that and it will apply those changes, right? So that basically was the reason behind um, using this. So after the schema has been created, it's going to ask you if you want to install the OpenM reverse proxy. So there is a reverse proxy, you know, um, there's a reverse proxy, which is like a native Apache plugin, and it is an essential part of OpenIAM. So either you can install it on your own, separately, or you can do it as part of this install. It's just more convenient, especially if you're new to OpenIAM, to do it as part of the install. Okay. So at this point, the install is done, and we're really waiting for these services to start. And so the way that we can do that is we can go back to our CLI and we can check the status. Right? So we see that some of them are up. Um, the UI is still pending. This one always takes the most amount of time. So, it'll take another minute or two and it should come up. And if there are any questions in the meantime, I'm happy to answer them. Um, in the meantime, we'll just keep on. So there's two services, the IDM service and the UI, they're both, coming up. Okay, um, okay, so there's a question, is it possible to update the default installed version of Maria? Can there be compatibility issues? Um, I'm a little reluctant to say yes or no on this. If you use a version which we've tested against, so for example, if you look at you know, I think we've tested on, you know what, I'll find out the exact version of MariaDB that we use and what we've supported. And on the next call, I'll add some details around that. I know that between a specific version of MariaDB and MySQL 8 from Red Hat, um, there are differences, and we had to make some significant changes in the schema to be able to support MySQL 8. There's just some differences in the way that in certain field attributes and the foreign key relationship. So there was a little bit of work that we had to do there. Okay, so we're just waiting for the UI to come up. So there's a question about, this is really not really related to some training, but this is really a question um, about the subscription, the managed services, and partners in Europe. And is it possible to share references for testimonials? So for testimonial, for customer references, just reach out to us, and we can do that. We can do that separately, right? The partners in Europe, there's a few which are listed on the OpenIAM website. There are a few others as well. If you need to be, us to kind of contact them or to help make introductions, we're more than happy to do that there as well. The subscription model itself is based on with the exception of higher education, which we do a little bit differently. For traditional enterprises, the it's the number of active users, um, again, separating out internal and external users, and based on SLA. So meaning like we have a gold and a platinum, so there's two different tiers. So if you have, say 1,000, active, say employees and contractors, then your subscription should be for that, right? So we don't count service accounts, we don't count admin accounts in that mix, but that's kind of like the way that we do it, right? There's another question about what are the recommended RAM configuration values for services such as Cassandra, Janus Graph, and the authorization. I think what you're asking about is what changes need to be made in a production setting outside of the default, right? So how about on the next session that we do, let's work that in terms of recommended sizing, because I think that's not something which I have offhand, but it's a question that comes up a lot, especially when you're trying to basically deploy OpenAM. Um, I think the parameters which are in here are fine for, a small deployment. But if you have, a large deployment, then definitely some customization. So tweaking needs to be done on those parameters in particular. So all the services are up. First step to validate them is we're going to use the following curl command. And this responds that everything's good, right? So um, let's open up a browser and um, let's put this IP address in there and see if we're able to log in. Okay, so far so good. The default password is in the docs. and it will ask you to change them. So this thing that you're seeing here right now is this is your default password policy, right? So all of these things are going to be things that you change as part of the configuration to kind of get your OpenIAM instance ready. Now, this next step is a critical step, and it is, it's very kind of, so we use the term content provider to basically represent a domain or a realm, right? And so in this case, we can call it a default content provider, and we're going to say it's going to support HTTP and HTTPS, and we're going to go ahead and do that. And so once this is set, it will, it will take a few minutes again for the cache internally to reset. But the next step is going to ask you to set some challenge questions and basically, log in again, right? So here, now in some cases, you probably won't want these questions. Personally, I find the challenge questions to be really annoying because I never remember what answers I gave these questions. Um, but again, this is all stuff that you can configure and you can turn on and off the 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 self-service password reset questions that you have, right? But at this point, the system's up, you've logged in, you can go to the About page and you can see the version that we just installed, right? So for our session today, we've kind of covered that first step. And unless there are any questions, we can meet next time. So next time we will work on setting up a connector and going through the application onboarding, right? So the next few sessions will be focused on the whole, application onboarding and the join, remove, or leavers processes. Okay. So thanks everybody for your time, and I will see you on Thursday.